All right, good morning or afternoon, everyone, wherever you are in the country. We just heard the recording bell, so we're live now. My name's Andy Fraze. I'm a member of the senior leadership sales team here at CDW Canada. Just wanted to take a moment to welcome everybody and thank you for joining us for today's CDW and Tanium operations demo. First and foremost, just want to make sure that I call out and recognize and wish everyone a happy International Women's Day today. Whether it be, coworkers, partners, or in their customer community, I've been lucky to, have some great role models, mentors, and colleagues, of women in the industry. So, just wanted to make sure that I recognize them. In terms of what we have on the docket today, I mean, security remains, a very important focus. Maybe even a little bit more now with some things going on in the world. I'm excited to have the folks from Tanium in to have a chat with us and take us through a little bit of the, deeper dive in terms of a demo of the product. So, um, without further ado, let's get into that. So I'm gonna pass it on to Ryan Doon from Tanium. Very excited to have him and the extended Tanium team here. So, thank you for your attendance. We do have the chat live. We do have the Q&A live. So just drop any questions you have in there, or feel free to come off mute and ask a question. So thanks again for your attendance. Thanks to Tanium. Thanks to the CWS team. Ryan, over to you.
Perfect. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Amazing. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Ryan Doon, and I'm a Director of Technical Solutions Engineering. I'm actually based out of Toronto, so if anybody's in the area, let me know. Always good to go out for some good food or drinks. So today we're going to be doing an overview of the Tanium platform from the operations side predominantly. Tanium has various solutions that find itself in sort of like operations, risk, and security. And I could spend a long time going through all aspects of Tanium, but today we'll sort of keep it high level. And definitely this is all about you. Any questions that you have, feel free to ask at any time. I won't be able to monitor the chat, so please, anybody that has a question, come off of mute or ask it in the chat. And then, the others who are looking at the chat, just please feel free to stop me at any point in time and let me know. And my assumption is most people here probably haven't seen Tanium. So that is sort of the angle that I'm going to take it from. A little bit about myself, because it's actually relevant to this conversation, is that I came from Microsoft before I came from Tanium, or came to Tanium. I was at Microsoft for almost 7 years, working predominantly with a lot of the large banks and government agencies across Canada and some financial institutions in the US as well. And what ended up happening is one of the banks that I used to work with here in Toronto, one of the largest Canadian banks, they were a full Microsoft shop. I was like their platforms engineer for 6.5 years. And it's interesting because I felt like I worked more for the bank than I did for Microsoft because I was on site like 4 to 5 days a week, pretty much every single week for 6.5 years. So they were a full Microsoft shop. They had at least 10 engineers on site every day. They were one of the biggest spenders in terms of like for services and products for Microsoft in Canada. And even with all that being said, they ended up purchasing Tanium. So, my job from the Microsoft side was actually to try and get Tanium out of the customer site. And as I started to learn the product, understanding why the bank was using it, I fell in love with it and then decided to come over to Tanium. And it actually became easier for me too, because lots of Microsoft people that I knew actually ended up coming over. And I think now at Tanium, we probably have like, I don't even know anymore, like 150 ex-Microsoft employees. That's somewhere in that number. So I tell that story because it's just relevant to what we're talking about today. Why would an organization that is fully invested in Microsoft then go and purchase something like Tanium? And a lot of that has to do with real-time visibility and control. Many products out there, and it's like I know SCCM very well. They do give you that capability of visibility and control, but definitely not real time. That's number one. Number two, a lot of solutions don't scale well. So as you start to expand the environment, you need a lot of infrastructure to support that solution. And also, if a small part of the infrastructure goes down, you lose a lot of visibility to your endpoints. And that's actually what you see here on the left-hand side. So, I'm not hating on something like SCCM, right? I just use it as an example because it's where I come from. Because don't get me wrong, we do have many customers that actually run Tanium alongside with SCCM. That tends to be more of like political reasons, I personally would say, but that's just, one guy's opinion. But we actually have the ability to verify the health of the SCCM agent on the endpoint. And that tends to be a problem that many organizations go through, is that, even if they have a product that is giving them visibility and control on the endpoint, that product can easily be broken. So for example, in the case of SCCM, if WMI is broken on the endpoint, you essentially lose visibility and control to that endpoint. So with Tanium, instead of leveraging this concept of the hub and spoke model, where you have all of these point-to-point connections, we actually have a highly patented architecture. And if you were to just search something like Tanium patents, feel free to do. I always tell people, feel free to do that on a Friday night if you want to have fun. And you'll see like all these patents about our linear chain architecture. So basically, instead of having all of these sort of primary and secondary servers, we can essentially manage 1 million endpoints with just 2 servers. So our architecture scales, whether you're a customer that has 1,000 endpoints or you have 1 million endpoints, you can manage an entire environment with just 2 servers. And instead of leveraging all of these point-to-point connections that you see here on the left-hand side, we essentially get the endpoints to work together. So what that means is, instead of just talking to one endpoint at a time, we get endpoints that are essentially on the same subnet to work together. So an example would be something like, let's just say I wanted to ask a question of a bunch of endpoints in the same subnet, like, give me your computer name, IP address, operating system, installed applications. Instead of doing that one by one, I actually pass that question into the subnet, into the linear chain, and that question is passed along from one endpoint to the next over the local LAN, as opposed to using the WAN. So this allows us to get data very quickly out of the environment without saturating your WAN links. So that means that even if you have slow links, again, we can get that data out very quickly within your environment, because it's much better to put that work on the local LAN as opposed to doing a ton of point-to-point connections over the WAN. This architecture that you see here of these linear chains, this is really a big differentiator with Tanium. Now, the question will probably be something like, well, what if it is working from home? Well, if it's work from home, then we won't leverage linear chains, because we wouldn't want an endpoint in Toronto to peer with an endpoint in Ottawa, for example. But something that's great about Tanium is that you can have a zero infrastructure solution. So all of the infrastructure is hosted in the cloud. So that means that we can give real-time visibility and control to endpoints no matter where they are in the world, as long as they're able to talk to your Tanium instance over the internet or through your VPN. But really keep this in mind, because when I go into the console and I start talking about real-time visibility and control, this is what enables that. And before I move on, are there any questions? All right, perfect. And I said, feel free to ask questions at any point in time, and then, or even save them for afterwards. So now let's take a look and let's go into the platform. Right now, I'm actually in dark mode. I mean, there's dark mode and light mode. I just tend to prefer dark mode. So what I'm going to do right now is actually ask a question. So I'm going to ask this question, get computer name, IP address, operating system, and installed applications from all machines. When I ask this question, we are actually going out in real time and asking this question from the endpoints that are online right now. So this data is actually not cached anywhere. It's coming back in real time from all of the endpoints. So again, whether you're a customer that has 1,000 endpoints, so in this lab environment, we have about 1,000 endpoints, about 1,100 endpoints, or you're a customer who has 1,000,000 endpoints, we can bring back results in a matter of seconds. So for example, one of the banks that I work with here in Toronto, they have about 180,000 endpoints, and they could bring results back from like the vast majority of their environment in less than 30 seconds. So, especially in today's world, I remember I've been at Tanium now for almost 4 years. And when I first joined, some people would actually ask the question of like, well, why is real time important? And that question has diminished more and more over the past 4 years. And what I attribute that to is all of the cyber attacks and all of the things that we're seeing hitting the news. And we all know, like even in what's currently going on around in the world right now, like all these cyber attacks that are occurring, they're happening in real time. So we need the ability to respond in real time. So interestingly enough, the ask about why do I need real time was there when I first joined Tanium, but I haven't heard it in over 2 years now. So at its core, real time visibility and control is a big differentiator for Tanium. And what we did is we took that core capability and then we started building solutions on top of it. A big problem that we saw with many of our customers is that they have all these different point solutions. You have a point solution for collecting asset data, compliance scanning and vulnerability scanning, a point solution for deployment and patching, a point solution for performance monitoring, sensitive data discovery, file integrity monitoring, EDR, threat response, incident response. Like you have all of these point solutions on the endpoint. And there, I mean, there's a lot of problems with that, right? I mean, cost is a big one because then you have all these different solutions. Two is you have no synergy because each solution is its own thing and you have separate teams managing each of those products. And many times those teams aren't necessarily collaborating with one another. And another big problem too is performance. So when I was at Microsoft, a big thing that I always dealt with is performance. And the issue is, every time you add another agent and an agent is doing something, you have performance degradation on the endpoint. And then also many times you have collisions too, because like one product is doing something, it's scanning a file, it locks it, and then another product has a problem with that. And then you just have all these problems. So with Tanium, we're like, well, if we can put an agent on the endpoint and we have real-time visibility and management, let's start using that capability for things like patching, deploying, vulnerability scanning, compliance scanning, threat hunting, performance monitoring. So with Tanium, what you're seeing here is all of these various modules, and each module is essentially like what you would find to be a point solution within a corporate environment. And many customers that we have are able to reduce the amount of point solutions that they have and consolidate that into one solution, which is Tanium. And that also means now that you have multiple teams working within the same house, if you want to put it that way. So there's a lot more communication between teams. The data is also the same, right? Because like, when you're working with various products, it's like, oh, we see this, but then the other product sees this. Well, whether I go from patching to deploying or vulnerability scanning, all the data is the same, right? It's all within the same platform. And something to note too is Tanium has very, very granular. I've worked with so many security products and like identity and access management products in my lifetime, Tanium has very granular role-based access control. So what that means is that, yes, we have all these different solutions and we want all of these various teams working within the same product, but I can highly limit what everyone has access to. I can give somebody just the ability to access, something like, patching. Some other team is just doing deployment. I can give somebody just the access to see something, but not actually do something within the platform. So with all of these solutions, we tend to bundle them into sort of three categories: operations, risk, and security. Today's conversation, we'll keep it more so on the operations side. And then, gladly we can have further discussions as we go on in time around like our risk portfolio and like, security portfolio as well too. Another important thing to know about Tanium is that in order to truly provide visibility and management to an endpoint, we need to deploy an agent onto that endpoint. So we support things like Windows, Linux, Mac, AIX, Solaris, and containers. We can discover other IP connected devices within the environment, but to truly provide visibility and control, we need to deploy an agent on that endpoint. So as I mentioned before, the whole zero infrastructure, that means that we just deploy an agent to the endpoint, and now that agent is able to report into your cloud infrastructure. And again, that gives you visibility control to your corporate environment, but also to all those individuals that are working from home. And something I saw too is that model works so well ever since the whole COVID, pandemic, right? Like individuals working from home, many customers, the solutions that they were using, they were never made for that, right? Like pretty much most solutions that were made were only took into account everybody working within the same corporate environment, right? But like I'll just give an example, like something SCCM, because that's just where I come from. It wasn't really designed for work from home. It was definitely designed for, okay, this is something within the corporate environment. So we had so many customers suffering from, the ability to do vulnerability scanning and patching and deployment. And that was a big push, like during when the pandemic started, and even now we have so many customers coming over to Tanium because of that whole zero infrastructure model and the ability to talk to endpoints anywhere in the world. So, and before I move on, let me take a little break. Are there any questions at this point?
Ryan, I see one in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, for Windows clients, is it a requirement to join the computer to a domain, or is workgroup computers permitted? What limitations will there be if the Tanium software is installed on a workgroup computer?
No, so good question. Yeah, so that's actually another great use case. You don't have to have the endpoint being domain joined. So as long as that endpoint has the Tanium agent installed on it, and it can report back to the Tanium infrastructure, it doesn't matter if it's domain joined or not. So that's actually a really good use case. We have this module known as Enforce. I'm jumping ahead, but it's actually, let's talk about this, talk about this. So let me just close this off here. Let's go over here. Yeah, so we have this module Enforce, and this actually allows you to manage a lot of native things that are built into, say, Windows, for example. So let's just say I wanted to control something like App Locker or ADMX configurations or BitLocker, firewall rules. So basically what you're doing is you're creating these enforcements to change something on the endpoint or enforce a specific configuration, or maybe you want to do like device control, for example. Many times with solutions, in order to do that, you would have to have that endpoint domain joined. So to answer your question is you don't have to have the endpoint domain joined. The requirement is actually just to have the Tanium agent on the endpoint, and that's it. So if you see here, for example, I went ahead, is here things like maybe I want to do like app locker or BitLocker control, or I want to do device control, file vault for Mac, firewall management, machine administrative templates. So for example, in the Windows world, you see here, we actually have hundreds of different policies, right? Like local policies that you're able to manage on the endpoint. And this is a big thing, like being able to manage all of these policies across all of your endpoints, whether they're domain joined or not. So that's actually a great question. Thank you for that. So, when I was asking that question earlier on, I went out in real time and asked that question. So the question becomes like, well, what if my endpoints aren't online right now? Because, obviously, in any given moment, you probably don't have 100% of your environment online. Well, that's where we have something like Asset. So what happens is Asset allows us to collect data over time. Many times an issue that we see is customers, when they're dealing with asset information across their environment, it tends to be a little stale. Stale in the sense of it could be a week old, it could be a few weeks old, it could be a few months old. But with Tanium, I can pull this data in a matter of seconds. I can give you visibility across all of your assets in a matter of seconds. And let's pull a report from within the past 24 hours, for example. So now, organizations, they're leveraging Tanium as the source of truth. So when we want to collect, say, all of the asset data of things like, hardware information, installed applications, who's the primary user on those assets, what software that we have within our environment. So maybe I want to see something like, show me all of my Microsoft software. So when it comes to things like licensing true up, I can actually see how much of this is actually deployed within my environment. And this data is actually stored within our asset database. So basically, what that means is you don't have to have all of the endpoints that are online right now. And what ends up happening is many customers will then leverage assets to actually be the source of truth for their CMDB. We actually have native API integrations with things like Flexera and ServiceNow. But even if you're not using Flexera or ServiceNow, we're able to push that data to pretty much any destination that you have. Something that we've also added to more recently, it's been around for a while, but we added it directly into the platform, was actually the ability to see how much software is being used. Like if you see here, we'll take something like, we can show you an endpoint. It's like, oh, you have this software, no usage has been detected. Or you actually have low usage, normal usage, or high usage. So you can actually see how much software is being used across your environment. And you can actually see that information in the matter of like minutes. So I can actually tell you on an endpoint how many minutes a software has been used over the past 30 days. So Asset is our solution for collecting data across the endpoints, which ends up being that source of truth for many customers to populate their CMDB. Or to give you an example, the same bank that I was talking about that has about 180,000, maybe a little bit more than that now, they have what's called like hundreds of Connect jobs. We have this module known as Connect, and this is part of the operations suite. And what Connect does is it allows you to take any of the data that Tanium gathers and actually push it out somewhere. So what that means is basically, like the customer, like the bank, their customers are all the other parts of the bank. So what they're doing is they're leveraging Tanium to gather all this data. It could be like hardware information, software information, primary user, software usage, information about SQL databases, Oracle databases, all this kind of stuff, and just create a connection and say, you know what? Every day, I want you to take this data and push it out to this destination. So now it becomes automated. So these teams are just receiving fresh data every day. And I said, this customer has hundreds and hundreds of these connections created. Another, and this goes to sort of like the world that I come from as well too, but a problem that pretty much all customers have is understanding what actual assets that they have within the environment. So what are all of the IP connected devices within the environment? So Tanium, we can leverage that real-time concept or that real-time visibility and control to actually scan your networks to show you what kind of devices that you actually have. So that means that in real time, we can scan the networks to show what are all of your managed devices, what are all of your unmanaged devices. Basically, unmanaged devices are devices where it could support the Tanium agent, but you don't have the Tanium agent on that endpoint. So now what we want to do, obviously, is start doing remediation. We want to get the Tanium agent on these endpoints. We want that list to go down because obviously we want to gain real-time visibility and control and deploy the Tanium agent to those endpoints. We can also show you endpoints that are unmanageable. Unmanageable are basically devices where we could not deploy the Tanium agent. So sort of outside of that Windows, Linux, Mac, AIX, Solaris, and containers realm. And also within Discover, we are providing that real-time visibility of what's there in your networks. But you also have the ability to add information into here as well too. For example, when I look at things like, oh, here's my managed devices and locations, you can actually, based on the information that we find, you can add in labels to define like what that thing is. You can also add in like, geographic locations based on subnets. But essentially, Discover is our solution that gives customers real-time visibility to what are all of the IP-connected devices in their environment. And interestingly enough, when customers start to use something like Discover, in larger environments, they tend to discover almost like 10 to 20% more devices than they ever thought that they had. So in larger environments, that can be like hundreds to thousands of machines that they were never aware of in their environment. Now, let's talk about something a little bit more closer to my heart is sort of deployment and patching, because those two activities are very closely related. So we'll start with something like patch. Because when I say closely related, essentially it's about pushing something down to the endpoint. So if you remember when we talked about this diagram, I used an example earlier on of like, oh, I have a question, I send it out one time, and then it propagates along the linear chain. Something to know what these linear chains too is they can break. So in the sense that if a bunch of endpoints go offline, that's totally fine because the chain can dynamically reform. And that same concept of sending one question in, that also works for when we want to send a file. So imagine I want to send a file to a bunch of endpoints on the same subnet. Well, instead of sending out that file to one endpoint at a time, I actually just send out the file one time to the subnet. And that file is actually distributed amongst all the other endpoints that need that file on the local LAN. So that gives you the ability to actually send out files very quickly to the organization without saturating the WAN. So whether the file that you're pushing down is a patch or the file that you're pushing down is a piece of software, Tanium gives organizations like the ability to push information out very quickly. And also the ability to remove something. Maybe you need to remove software very quickly across your organization, or maybe you need to roll back a patch very quickly across your organization. We can do that as well too. So with patch, this is a full-blown enterprise solution. And what I mean by that is this is a full replacement for whatever the customer may be using in terms of patching. So we ingest what is known as the offline cab file. And Basically, that allows us to ingest what Microsoft provides, and then we're able to scan your endpoints in real time against all of the patches and then let you know which are applicable. And then from there, you can actually go and create patch lists to say, oh, I want these endpoints to get these patches. And again, something with Tanium is you're going to get that real-time visibility of what patching looks like within your environment. We give all the options that customers are used to. So, for example, being able to create maintenance windows to patch at a certain time, end user notifications. So that ability to notify users of like, oh, a patch is, there's a patch waiting to be installed. Do you want to install it now? Do you want to delay? You can force a reboot. You can, give the user some time before they reboot. So basically, all those options that you see in other enterprise patching solutions, we have within our solution as well. So many organizations that I work with, we just radically transform their timing. So, many times in larger organizations, when they're doing patching and deploying, it took them weeks to do this just because of like a big thing was that they don't want to saturate their network by pushing these patches out. But with Tanium, with our linear chains, we highly reduce the amount of data that goes out. As I said, like if you have 200 endpoints on the same subnet that need that file, we literally only send the file out one time. That file is quickly distributed and it doesn't saturate your WAN links because the data is only being transferred over the local LAN. Now, the complement to patch, because patch is all around operating system patching, and this works for Windows and Linux. And the complement to patch is deploy, because what if I want to push software that is not a patch? So what you're going to see here is within, and just we have tons of testing that we always do within our demo environment. But basically, within our deploy solution, we have our predefined package gallery. So predefined package gallery is basically, we see lots of software that our customers use, and we actually have the packages created for them. The packages to install, update, and remove this software across their organization. And again, we're automatically scanning the endpoints for this. Also with deploy, you're able to do in-place upgrades for Windows 10, for example. So whether it's a package or software or Windows 10 in-place upgrades, you're able to leverage deploy to do that. And if it's outside of the predefined package gallery, then you can go and create your own software packages as well too. What's really good about this is like the learning curve for Tanium is very simple. Like when you want to go and create a software package, and I'm just like, oh, I want to create a package. It's kind of like, oh, what files are there? If it's an MSI, for example, then we'll automatically ingest that. Do you have any system requirements? What are the installation requirements? How do you want to verify? It's very simple to build packages within Tanium. Very, shallow learning curve for new administrators. We have software bundles. So software bundles are essentially, you're creating a sequence of software that needs to be on the endpoints. So many customers that we have, what they do is they create what's called like a long running job. And basically it always lives. So basically Tanium is always scanning the endpoints to make sure that the endpoints in the engineering department have the software. If an endpoint is detected without the software, then we will automatically push that software to the endpoint. So we're doing automated remediation. And then the other thing too is we have self-service profiles. So basically self-service profiles is where you get like that icon on your desktop. And basically we give users the ability to choose, when to install, update, or remove software. And again, deploy leverages, that concept of like, oh, do you want to notify the user? Do you want to give them the ability to choose when they restart, or do you want to force the restart? So full user notifications is also built into deploy. Um, one of the other modules I will discuss today, and this goes more into our sort of like security realm, but it's a heavily used module, is comply. Comply is our vulnerability and compliance scanning solution. So basically, um, from a compliance perspective, we worked with the Center for Information Security, and we basically partnered with them to get all the default baselines for compliance built into the product. And basically, as you see here, many times customers would need a separate license to get this, but now it's built into the product. And then from a vulnerability perspective, we actually have what's known as the Tanium vulnerability library. Basically, for Windows, Linux, and Mac, we have an up-to-date library that's automatically updated with all the latest CVEs. So any moment there's a public CVE released, we will always have it within our database. And something that we've added more recently is that we can also scan for vulnerabilities on network devices and other devices too. So as long as like Cisco ASA, Cisco iOS, or VMware ESXi, we can also scan for vulnerabilities on that. So what that ends up looking like is, as you see here, real-time visibility to compliance across your entire organization. So instead of taking days or weeks to scan your organization, you can do this in the matter of minutes to an hour across a large organization. And the same is said for vulnerability. Being able to scan your entire organization in the matter of minutes to an hour to see which vulnerabilities exist. And what's also great too is, what if you have a vulnerability that's associated with a Microsoft patch? Well, that means that I can quickly go from being within comply and then actually pivot right into patch to start doing remediation. So again, this is something that our customers love, is to do have this all within one product instead of having to go to a separate solution to do that. One of the last modules, as I said, we have many other modules. One of the last modules that I'll discuss today is trends. So trends is the ability to take all this information that we can collect from endpoints and actually show that data over time. So for example, I'll go for something like, we'll go with like patch, right? That's one of the modules that we looked at. So over time, let's see how many systems are missing critical and important patches, right? Or operating systems, missing patches by severity over the last 90 days, or missing patches within the past 24 hours. How many endpoints currently online are compliant versus not compliant, historical compliance, for example. So we have tons of these trends boards for all the different modules. So for example, something that we looked at too was something like Discover. So I can see something like, show me my interfaces that have been managed over time, or all my interfaces, unmanaged, or, devices that I wasn't expecting on the network over time. So basically, Tanium also has the ability to build these rich management dashboards, or dashboards that you would present to the executive team, leveraging all of this real-time data that we are collecting within the platform. So from my side, as I said, for today, we were predominantly covering the operations side of things. So now I'll kind of just open it up for the team for any questions that you may have.
So just a reminder, everyone, in terms of questions, feel free to drop them in the chat window, in the Q&A window, or jump off of mute if you want to ask Ryan live. We did just have a question pop up in the chat, but it's a bit more operational. There was a person who joined late asking if it would be possible to send the recording, and yes, we will be able to send the recording. Or Renee, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we might also publish it to the CDW YouTube site.
That's correct. So everyone in attendance and those who registered and also missed the event will get the link, and you can view it on YouTube.
Perfect.
And there is, if we have no questions, there is one more module that I'll cover, but I'll just give it a moment to see if there are any questions. And somebody will have to read me the question because I just, as I said, I'm hyper.
Oh, yeah.
Focused on this. Yeah.
I got your back, my friend. I think we have a couple more that dropped in. So first one is, what ports or protocols need to be open or allowed for the firewall communication between agent and the main server?
Yeah, good question. So basically, we actually only need two things to be done. Port 17472 between clients on the same subnet. So that is two-way communication, but that's all within the same subnet within your corporate network. And then from the client to your Tanium server in the cloud, it's just port 17472 outbound, and that's it.
And I have another question here. For compliance, does that include data classification, specifically security data, CGP, ITAR, protected AB?
No, so so when we talk about compliance, that's more from the server and desktop hardening side. In terms of data, so when we talk about data, we have two solutions. One is our file integrity monitoring solution. So basically, if you wanted to monitor changes to, files, folders, the registry, for example, you can leverage FIM. And also, another thing is we have a product known as Reveal. So Reveal is all about discovery of data at rest on the endpoint. So for example, let's just say you want to scan the endpoints in real time to see if there's any kind of like PCI, HIPAA, GDPR, CCPA data on the endpoint. So basically, we're indexing the endpoints, in real time and giving you visibility across all of the files. But yeah, so that's what we do in terms of data. But we don't do. I know you're also asking about like data classification. We don't do that within our product.
Gotcha. Does Tanium support REST APIs?
1,000,000%. We actually, you can manage the entire platform leveraging our REST API. So we have tons of customers. Like we actually have a fully published, it's something that we give to our customers is like our REST API manual that basically tells you all the, how you can manage the entire platform using the REST API. So that's a great question because since everything can be managed through the REST API, we have so many customers that other products are leveraging Tanium to pull data and then give that data back to their product because it can all be done through the REST API. So yes, great question.
Excellent. What
All
kind
the
of
data that
data?
you're seeing. Yeah, so to answer your question, all of the data that you're seeing right here. So for example, like me even asking a question like, show me computer name, IP address, operating system, and installed applications, you can pull that back to the REST API. Show me vulnerabilities or compliance issue, like all this data that you're seeing can be pulled back leveraging the REST API. So customers will then have other solutions that are using Tanium for that sort of source of truth to then feed into their other systems.
Ryan, another one. What do customers integrate Tanium with usually?
So if you're talking about a direct, I mean, if you're talking about like a direct API integration, just about feeding data, you know, ServiceNow is a big one. Flexera is a big one. Things like Splunk. So if you're talking about feeding data, I mean, we push data everywhere you can imagine, right? Splunk, ServiceNow, Flexera, SQL databases, and so forth. But then if you're talking about, I mean, ServiceNow is a big, big one, right? So Tanium actually has a product that is, you know, a combination of ServiceNow and Tanium working together called IT Service Center. So, you know, basically ServiceNow is a big partner with Tanium. But, you know, even things like, you know, Chef and Puppet that can leverage the REST API, customers are leveraging that to create workflows that include things like Tanium. So yeah, that's what I would say are some of the high level ones that I've seen predominantly.
I think that's currently it from the chat and the Q&A.
Okay. So I'll just spend maybe just a few minutes on one last thing, is our performance module. So basically, again, what we wanted to do was give customers real-time visibility to performance across their organization. You know, there's many different ways to attack performance. So, you know, there's solutions that do application performance or network performance. We look at performance from the endpoint perspective. So basically, what we say is like, if your endpoint isn't healthy, then all the other things that reside on the endpoint are not healthy. So for us, we give customers real-time visibility to things like CPU issues across your organization, memory issues, disk capacity, disk latency, application crashes, system crashes. But again, being able to pull this data back in real time across the organization. What's also nice too is that each endpoint actually has its own database. So by default, we keep up to about 14 days worth of data on each of the endpoints. So that means that we have the ability to always look back in time to see exactly what was going on the endpoint. We have many customers who are leveraging performance with their sort of help desk, because help desk can go in and see like, oh, 2603 has been having all these CPU events. You know what? Let me go and take a closer look. So we actually have this feature known as Direct Connect. Direct Connect allows you to directly connect to that endpoint to see what's going on in real time without impacting the user session. So for example, let's say I wanted to browse the file system. I could bring back certain files or logs that I needed to without having to, you know, be on the phone with the user and trying to connect to their endpoint. But here I can get very detailed information. You know, for example, as you see here, I can see per process CPU usage. I can also see per process memory usage to see exactly what was going on that endpoint, what's consuming the most amount of CPU, what's consuming the most amount of memory. I can see the effect of events from you know, a networking perspective. I can see the effect of events from a disk perspective. I can see the effect of events from an I/O perspective. And again, I can see what's going on in terms of application crashes and system crashes. So, you know, a good example I'll give to end off this is, you know, one of the customers, again, you know, one of the banks that I work with, they deployed performance to about 120,000 endpoints over a weekend. And it was like Monday, and we were just looking through the data, and we go into like events, and I'm seeing like thousands of CPU events from their security software, like one of their security softwares that they use. And it turns out that over the weekend, they pushed out a new version of this security product. Turns out that version had issues around CPU. but people hadn't started complaining about it yet. You know, many times people, when they're having performance issues, they're not automatically like raising a ticket. But I can say, I can show them, I'm like, listen, you're having like thousands of performance issues around CPU. And then they were able to leverage Tanium deploy to then go and quickly remove that software across all of their endpoints, and then, you know, get the vendor to, you know, give them a newer version or a version that fixed that issue. And then again, being able to redeploy that software all within the same product. So that ability to pivot from something like, you know, vulnerability scanning to patching, or from performance to deploying software, all within the same console. So we just find that a lot of customers that we work with, they're really able to do, you know, consolidation of the tools that they have within the endpoint. So that tends to be a huge value add for our customers, to be able to get rid of, you know, various endpoint solutions and consolidate a lot of that into just one product. And that's it from my side.
All right, perfect, Ryan. Thank you. If there are any last minute questions, feel free to drop them in. However, I think this would would wrap us up for the hour that we had planned. Thank you to everyone who was able to find themselves in attendance today. We really appreciate your attendance here. Thanks to the team at Tanium for helping CDW put on these events. And just again, for the customers that we have on the phone, if you know, we want to continue to, you know, to help bring you you know, valuable and relevant partners to the market like Tanium. So if you have any, you know, if you have any feedback for us, if there's anyone else you'd like to see, if you'd like to, you know, do a deeper dive, you know, into more Tanium products too, like feel free to reach out to your account manager at CDW. I know we have Patrick Wells here from the BC sales office on the phone. And but if there's anything, you know, anything you'd like us to, you know, take a look at, you know, let's continue to have a two-way communication and feedback loop. But again, thanks to the Tanium team. Thanks, Ryan, for going through that demo. Like a lot of features packed into the suite, you know, that we have here you know, that are relevant and are answering the questions that we're having some of our customers. So, you know, from me on the CDW side, appreciate everyone's attendance here, and you know, have a great day and enjoy the rest of your week.
Great to speak with everyone, and I hope you guys all have a great day. Thank you.